and until she goes to mikvah. So these laws here are the laws of. We're going to focus on. This is the fourth book. It's called the Book of Nashim. The Ram always starts with a verse. These are the laws of getting married, the laws of divorce, the laws of a levirate marriage, the laws of marrying a really young girl who's not yet of age, and the laws of a lady, the sota lady, which we're concerned that maybe she cheated on her husband, and she does a whole process that we test her out. We give her special waters, and if she's in fact guilty, she dies. It's one of the only examples where the Torah lets us rely on a totally miraculous occasion. So we'll start right away. There's 4 mitzvahs, the laws of Ishus. Ishus means the laws of women. There are 4 mitzvahs, 2 positive and 2 negative. These 2 of them are the mitzvah for a lady, to get married to a lady, with a ketubah and with kedushin. We'll discuss what those things are. You should not have relations with a lady without a ketubah and kedushin. You should not refrain from giving her the things that you owe her, and you should have children with her. And we'll explain these mitzvahs in these following chapters. So before the giving of the Torah, chapter 1, before the giving of the Torah, and this is essentially the law for humanity. Marriage doesn't necessarily have a legal right. In other words, you can consider whatever you want marriage without Jewish law. So before the giving of the Torah, a person would bump into someone in the marketplace, and if they wanted to go get married, he would take it into her house and they would have relations, and she would be his wife, right? So it was very, very simple. I mean, a civil law nowadays, it's really, in other words, legal marriage doesn't necessarily have to be that way. That's something we created artificially. We created legal marriage or a concept of marriage. The Torah doesn't recognize marriages unless they are done according to Jewish law. In other words, as we'll say later, unless they're done fully according to Jewish law. Okay. Since the Torah was given, Jewish people were commanded that if they want to get married, then they have to buy her in front of 2 witnesses. And afterwards, they will be a wife. As it says, Ki kachishisha, when a man acquires a wife and they come together. He comes to her. This method of marriage is Torah, and there are 3 ways that the marriage could be done. She could be acquired. So a man has to buy a wife, basically. How? But it's a very specific way. It's not like a sale. In other words, it's not like a sale in the marketplace. The Torah has a specific way to acquire a wife. So there are 3 ways. Either he can do it by giving her money, or value of money, or he can give her a document, or he can have relations with her and they will establish that these relations are for the sake of marriage. And then they are considered halachically married. They're married according to Jewish law. Okay, let's go on. These things are called Kiddushin or Erusin. Those are the 2 names, Erusin or Kiddushin, which basically means, Kiddushin means sanctified, but it basically means you are set aside. You're telling the lady, you're now set aside for me, you can't go with other men. And someone who's brought with these things, she is either called Mekudeshes, betrothed, or Meres. There are 2 words which mean similar things in Hebrew. Once she's acquired, even though he doesn't have relations with her, she is now married to a man, designated to a man, and if she has relations with someone else, or someone else has relations to her, or rapes her, they are liable of a death penalty. If you have in Jewish law, if you have out of marriage relations, if she is not raped, she's agreeing to it, then she's also gets a death penalty. And if they want a divorce, they have to get a divorce document. They have to do the divorce process, we'll say later.
I have a question then.
Sure.
Obviously, the oldest profession in the world, a man gives a woman money and she gives him sexual relations in return. Isn't that then, by definition, a marriage under what we just
said? We'll say later, if they're not having relations for the sake of getting married, then they're not considered married. You're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to do that in the Torah. But yeah, she's not married until they've established that they're going to do it, and we'll talk about how they establish that. Before the giving, so similarly, before the giving of the Torah, if a man would meet a lady and he wanted, to have relations with her, he would give her a payment, and they do that, and they have, she would be a harlot, and they would go, and that was called a kadesha. A kadesha means a harlot, a prostitute. However, once the Torah was given, prostitutes are no longer allowed. And therefore, anyone who, now, it's not death penalty, but therefore, anybody who goes with a prostitute, then they get malchus, they get lashes, because the Torah says you should not have any prostitutes. Okay, now this is very interesting. Anything which, if you have relations, and if you have those relations, is a very serious punishment of karis. Karis is one of the most serious punishments of the Torah. It means you're cut off from God. And what would happen is people would die young if they had it. It was kind of miraculous. Nowadays, the Tanya says we're not so connected with our souls, so we don't necessarily experience it in a physical way. But karis is a very, very strict punishment. So these are relations in Achremos, which are called the arayas. These are the illicit relations. For example, someone has relations with their mother, their sister, or daughter. Those are all listed clearly in the Torah. We actually read them on Yom Kippur at Mincha. We read a list of them. Yom Kippur at Mincha, that's when we read all the arayas. There are other people who are forbidden because the Jewish tradition, in other words, it's not explicit in the Torah. And there are other people who are forbidden because divrei soifrim, the rabbis said they're forbidden. These are called shniyos. They are secondary. They are secondary to the arayas, which are listed in the Torah. Okay, and so these are the women that are forbidden to have relations, and the Rambam is going to list the 20. These are the shniyos. Okay, so these are the ones which are forbidden. Your mother's mother, if someone has relations with their grandmother, and that has no end, even if it's your mother's 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 mother, forever. Your father's mother, and your father's mother, and your.
He lists all the combinations.
Yes, so these are all the possible combinations, and they all go back. If you say a mother or a father, they all go back all the way. And your father's father's mother. Okay, the wife of your father, the wife of your father's father, and this has no end going back. Okay, so. Like, for example, if you take Jacob, we're all the children of Jacob, so Jacob's mother's mother's mother, or Jacob's wives, would be forbidden on any of the progeny of the Jewish people. The wife of your father,
which one are you?
number 6. Sorry, these are just kind of confusing because in Hebrew and English they have different orders.
One's mother's father's wife.
Mother's father's wife. Mother's father's wife is forbidden. So that's a second, right? So your mother's father's wife is forbidden. So even though it's not your mother's mother, right? Your mother's father's wife is your grandmother, right? But he can have multiple wives or have a second wife after he becomes a widow or whatever it is. Then you have the wife of your father's brother, maternal, right? And then you have the wife of the brother of your mother, whether it's from the mother or whether it's from the father. Okay, then you have your son's bride, and this has no end. So now, even if it's the bride of your son's son's son until the end of the world, okay. So now, then you have the bride, the daughter-in-law of your daughter. So I just want to note about all these things. What's interesting about them is some of them are logical, and some of them are not. In fact, someone could end up marrying. Okay, so you have the bride of your daughter, in other words, your daughter's daughter-in-law, and then you have the daughter of your bas panoi, your son's daughter's daughter, and then you have the bas ben benoi, the daughter of your son's son, and then you have the your daughter's daughter, and then you have your bas ben bitoi, the daughter of your daughter's son. Then you have bas ben, the daughter of your son's wife. and then you have bas ishtoi, the daughter of your wife's daughter's daughter. You have your wife's son's daughter, the mother, the father of the wife of the mother of the wife of your father's
18,
mother, so 17.
17.
Yeah, right. So the wife,
Wife's father's mother's mother.
wife's father's mother's mother, and then you have your wife's mother's father's mother, and then you have your wife's mother's mother, and then you have your wife's father's mother. Comes out. There are 4 of them which have no hefsek. In other words, these are the ones which go on forever. You know, when you go on, anytime you go to a mother, all generations, or keep going lower. What?
Only possible.
No, okay, no. I'm not talking about that. Anything that's forbidden from the Torah, and you don't have kares, this is called a lav. And these are called Isurei Kedusha, and there are 9 of them. These are things which are forbidden, which are actually quite relevant today. A widow can't get married to a high priest. A divorced person, or a prostitute, someone who was a prostitute, or someone who was born from an illicit relationship, cannot get married to a Kohen, high priest, or a Kohen. So this sometimes happens. You have, someone who gets divorced and they fall in love and they want to get married to a Kohen. They're not allowed to. A mamzera, someone who's a bastard, can't marry to a Jewish male. A girl can't marry to a mamzer, but you don't get death penalty. A Bas Yisrael cannot get married to someone from Ammon and Moab. A lady cannot get married to someone from Ammon and Moab. A lady cannot get married to someone who's a Tzuadak or Kros Shavcha. These are people who had certain things happen to their private part. A divorce you cannot get married to someone who you divorced after she's married to someone else. So if someone gets divorced, they can get remarried. But after she gets married to someone else, and then let's say she divorces, she cannot get married to the first husband. And a Yavama, a lady who gets married to a person who's not her, it's just a levirate marriage, someone who's not her brother-in-law, and she's still supposed to. A Chalutza, someone who decides not to get a levirate marriage, she is like someone who is divorced, and she's forbidden to a Kohen. Nisinim, we'll talk about those in detail, but they are someone we don't know who their father is, so they cannot get married like a mamzer, whether they're male or female, and that's rabbinic. Later on, we will explain what nesinim are. There's another thing which is forbidden, and these are forbidden, but you don't get lashes. This is a Mitzri, Egyptian person, an Edomite. These are first generation and second generation, both male and female. Someone who got married to a Kohen Gadol. So now these things, I'll note. So an Egyptian is not an Egyptian nowadays, but if an Egyptian was able to trace back their lineage to the biblical Egyptians, please be quiet. They were Egyptians. If they were getting in the olden days, they would have to convert and only marry an Egyptian converts, and then for 3 generations, their kids would marry Egyptian converts, and then after the 3rd generation, they would be regular Jews. So those are someone who got married to a Kohen Gadol, because it doesn't say don't come into the nation or don't marry them. It just says by these things the 3rd generation. So you learn that the 1st and 2nd generation shouldn't learn. So therefore we don't get lashes if you marry them. And from here we learn, so a Kohen Gadol has to get married to only a virgin. That's the rule. He can't get married to someone. So actually it's really sad if God forbid, you have a Kohen and his wife gets raped by force. It's a really sad law. So most Jews, if the wife gets raped, God forbid, they can stay married. But a Kohen is extra holy; he can't stay married. So that's an interesting law.
So, I know this is kind of a dumb question. How do you determine whether you're a Kohen or not?
The simple
I know
way.
it's from family
All right. So
lineage.
the simple truth is, when it comes to a Kohen, we can't really fully determine anyone's a Kohen nowadays, right? Because it's too many generations, and very few people have, direct lineage, knowing every generation going back to the biblical times. There are some people who do. Even the ones who do, they're called a Kohen Meyuchas, someone who has a strong line of Kohanim. Even that, we can't, we determine the best that we can, but when Mashiach comes and people will serve in the temple, the rabbis are going to have to redo it. Now they'll have prophets, so they'll be able to determine it better. But nowadays, when someone says they're a Kohen or Levi, we trust them. There isn't so much illegal things. It can't be that bad if they're not a Kohen or Levi. What are you doing? Huh? What, Mendel? There isn't so much Kohen or Levi that. Oh, he's probably pointing to you because you're a Levi.
The Levi.
Yeah. So there isn't so much we can do nowadays. So nowadays, when someone says they're Kohen or Levi, typically it means their father is a Levi or their father is a Kohen, and they told them, and that's what we assume. We don't have to have that much strong halachic ramification. Like, if a Yisrael gets the first Aliyah and there's a Kohen, it's not that bad. It's not that bad. It's not that big of a deal. In most shuls, they don't even give Levi the first Aliyah. Some shuls do that. I do that here. Most shuls, if there's a bar mitzvah or something, then they might be like, oh, sorry, this week we're going to give it to someone else because we have to. But a Kohen you have to give. Now, the thing with a Kohen is if someone would say, do you know for sure you're a Kohen? The answer is no, we don't know for sure. We've been through exile. We've been through a lot of trials and tribulations. Even the families who do have it traced back, which there are families who are traced back, let's say 1,000 years ago, a wife got raped and didn't tell her husband, and then they had a kid after, that kid won't be a Kohen, and it's a secret. And all the generations after, so we don't really know. Now we just do the best we can.
Yeah, I only know through my father.
Yeah, well, so
I never knew, my grandfather died when I was a child, so.
yeah, so when Mashiach comes, there'll likely be some cleaning up, whatever it is. Some people will find out that they were a Kohen and they weren't, and some people find out they weren't a Kohen and they thought they were. So, different things. But that's just the way exile has been to us. There is also, you do have all the time. I mean, this question comes a lot of times. Someone comes to a rabbi and they say, Mazel Tov, I'm engaged, a Kohen, and he's engaged to a lady who was divorced, or he's engaged to a lady who had, nowadays, unfortunately, almost every college kid has non-marital relations, and so that makes young people who are not religious, who are Kohanim, it's really hard. They can't find anyone to marry because she's not allowed to get married to someone like that. So there are rabbis. What they'll do is they will find ways to take away your Kohen-ness or your Levite-ness. In other words, they'll say, hey, we have evidence that your grandfather wasn't so religious. Tell us about your grandmother. They'll kind of try and find that maybe you were not really a Kohen.
So that they can marry.
So they can marry because, it's hard to follow halachically married is like a privilege, and it's like not everyone will do it. So, here's a guy, he's getting married to a Jewish girl and everything, and she's a prostitute or whatever, what it is? And it's like, but she's Jewish and she's wonderful and everything like that, and she's Orthodox, so there are rabbis who sometimes they will try and find loopholes. It's a very controversial. It's a very controversial section of halacha because you can't. It's difficult if you're going to walk around saying you're a Kohen all the time when it's convenient you're not. It's difficult.
Yeah.
I thought about that. You never know, right?
We don't know.
You basically verified what my thoughts were.
So in Jewish law, we don't have to. Again, if you would be a Kohen, if you would not be a Kohen, and you would think you're a Kohen, and you would serve in the temple in Jerusalem, that would be death penalty. It's a pretty big deal, right?
You're a fake Kohen.
Yeah, or whatever. You were told by your dad, and your granddad made it up. They mixed it up. They took the Kohen last name. That would be a pretty big offense, right? But nowadays, there isn't really any offense. The only offense there is getting married. Now, if you are, let's say a Kohen marries a lady who's divorced, and they have children. The children are no longer Kohanim, and they can marry any other Jewish people except for Kohanim. The daughters can't marry Kohanim. But, now the thing is you're not halachically supposed to stay married. So you can't just say, I decided I'm not going to be a Kohen anymore. It's problematic. So, and if, I'll be honest, conservative and reform marry Kohanim to people who are forbidden to them for many years. It's a big problem because it's not really a marriage. I mean, now we'll talk about marriage, even if a lot of times you'll have rabbis consider reform, and they're not actually aware of Jewish law. They don't know the Jewish law. So when they're doing the marriage, but as we'll see, even still, even if a guy decides to live with a lady and they decide they're married to get married civilly, some opinions say they are halachically married because they got married and they're halachically married. It's a loophole marriage. It's a debate. What we do actually is we whenever it's convenient, we consider them halachically married. And whenever it's not convenient, we consider them non-halachically married. Like let's say they only get a civil divorce. We will consider them, and they don't get a halachic divorce, we will not consider them divorced, we'll consider it as if they were never married. So now, Kohanim is very difficult because if you're not allowed to stay married, you're not allowed to. So
One could ask, since we don't have the temple and the rituals of the temple, why maintain Kohen and Levi designations at all? Since for the Kohanim it presents a hurdle to get married, as you point out.
Well,
Then you won't be able to serve in the temple on Mashiach.
so number one is, the Torah, the mitzvahs of the Kohanim are not only serving in the temple. Exactly for that reason, a Kohen needs to know you are forbidden to getting married. You are not allowed to get married to that person. So if you do that, if you're a Kohen, you'd be doing something which is forbidden. It doesn't have to do with our maintaining. Even if we don't maintain someone's a Kohen, they're still a Kohen, right? So there are a lot of things, like a Kohen is not allowed to go into a cemetery. So if we say, hey, you know what, forget this Kohen thing, doesn't matter, he's still forbidden. A Kohen is not something that you choose, it's something that God chose in Aaron. So that's why we maintain it. There are a lot of laws today which are relevant. Now, nowadays, if you, there are in America potentially, or there are in the world potentially a lot of Kohanim who lose their Kohen status. I'll give you an example. If a Kohen marries a convert, their kids are not Kohanim anymore, right? So now they might have the last name Kohen, and they want to be a Kohen and everything like that, but it simply doesn't transmit. So that is, these are the different,
But it's still a valid marriage.
so that's a debate. Ultimately, they're not supposed to stay married. They're not supposed to stay married.
So, in Israel, would it be considered a valid marriage? No.
No.
Do they enforce it?
In America, it wouldn't either. Just we don't have any way of enforcing it. In Israel, when you go to Israel, if you want to get married, the rabbis, the rabbinical sector of Israel, is in charge of the marriages. So yes, they do enforce it.
So
In America, we also enforce it. Like I wouldn't marry someone if they're not allowed to get married. But people can go nowadays and say, "Hey, David, can you marry us?" And David can do it, no problem. Like you don't need to have. But yeah, it is a sad thing when a kid thinks he's a Kohen or whatever it is, and he's not.
Does Bat Kohen have any meaning?
Yes, it does. It does. It doesn't have as much halachic ramification. It doesn't have as much halachic ramification, but it has a little bit. It has a little bit of halachic
are
ramification.
we going to later on in the Rambam go through all the ways of divorce also?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just kind of curious because if we're going to go through all the ways of marriage and not marriage, and I want to also know about the ways of divorce and not
Well,
divorce.
I'll be honest, sometimes rabbis so there is a specific one way of divorcing that we'll go through. There's one way of divorcing, and if you're not divorced, it's a really big problem. Because you might be civilly divorced, and you might be living another life,
And if you marry somebody else,
But,
you marry another man, it's the
but the
same.
problem is you
It's the same
don't
if you marry
have,
another man.
you don't have, the problem is you're still considered married, even though you haven't seen them in 10 years, even though you got civilly divorced, you don't talk to them, you're considered married. To the extent that there's sometimes rabbis, when they're marrying two people, if the husband and wife, they see that they're really like not interested in Judaism, and they assume they won't get a divorce, they'll fake the marriage. Or
There was
they'll,
a cemetery near Beth Tefillah, the shul that we belong to, and it had a pond. It was on their property, there weren't any graves, but it was still contiguous. And the high school kids during graduation used to like to go over to the pond and take photos. Except there would always be these boys who were Kohanim who would not do it. And I would,
That's right.
because it was part of the cemetery, even though there were no graves or anything in that particular area, they still wouldn't go into the domain of the cemetery.
Okay, Rabbi brought up a scenario that just fascinates me. How would they fake a marriage? How does a rabbi fake a marriage?
We'll see really soon that, we'll see really soon that there's a lot of laws in the marriage. So you just don't do one of those laws. We'll see soon that there are witnesses who are kosher witnesses, and their witnesses are not kosher witnesses. And so if you have a non-kosher witness, then the marriage isn't a marriage.
So let me ask you the question. If two people want to get married and there's no reason for them not to, but the rabbi feels that there's a reason for them not to, he can still do that?
Shouldn't do it.
The reason why he was doing it.
One of the people.
No. So basically, what the rabbi is trying to do is he knows he's worried they're not going to get divorced if they need to get properly. If they need to get divorced, what's going to happen? They're not going to come back to him, right? So yeah, any rabbi who's marrying them has to make certain that they know that they are going to go to a proper rabbi to get divorced. Because if they don't know that, what's going to happen is they're going to separate, get divorced, remarry, and their kids are never going to be able to marry Jewish people or marry anybody.
The kids will be illegitimate.
The illegitimate children, they'll be called bastards. So it's a very scary thing. So it's a rare thing that rabbis would do. A lot of rabbis would just say, "I'm sorry, I can't marry you."
Yeah, well, that makes sense to
But
me.
I know a case where a rabbi was doing a marriage, and there was the father of the bride was like some kind of really liberal rabbi, and he said something so anti-Jewish. It was so uncomfortable for the rabbi doing it. He said, "There's no way these people will come back." Now he wasn't used to marrying people who weren't observant. So it was, you can't imagine them coming back. But really what he's trying to do is a favor for them. He's really doing a favor for them. So really, yes, if you don't actually going to want to get married according to Jewish law, it might be smart not to get married, right? Because getting married according to Jewish law is the best thing, but it also does oblige certain responsibilities.
You're constrained then.
So yeah, I mean, so this specific case, I think the rabbi was used to marrying only Orthodox people, and then this couple came, he didn't even know them, and then he kind of met them during the thing, and he said, "Oh boy, this is not going to end pretty." So, but that is because Jewish marriage has certain obligations. If somebody is not willing to get divorced, 950. If someone's not willing to get divorced, according to Jewish law, they should not get married according to Jewish law.
Okay, so I'm sorry,
Yeah.
this is fascinating to me.
Yeah, sure.
So now, when a rabbi performs a marriage for two people and he feels that they should get married, then he's actually performing the civil part of the marriage, right? Because he signs all the civil documents. Is that also halakha?
No, so he's not necessarily performing the civil marriage.
Even though he's signing all the documents?
Well, there's many states. There's different states have different laws. But if, let's say, he does not want to do the civil for whatever reason, it might be illegal not to do the civil. Some states, the rabbi has nothing to do with it. Some states, they say, here, this is for convenience sake, so you don't have to come in the office, that the rabbi sent it in. And some states he has to. But if a rabbi does not do anything civil, you are still 100% married, 100% married, even if you didn't do anything civil. There's some states where people will say, "Hey, let me go get married there because we don't want to be civilly married. We both amassed a fortune, and the tax laws are going to mess us up." So yeah, the civil marriage has nothing to do with Jewish law.
Okay.
That's just civil law.
Will a rabbi do a civil marriage as well? I mean,
So most states, the rabbi will fill out a form, mail it in, saying, "I performed a Jewish marriage, which is recognized civilly," and then they'll take it in. However, let's say he doesn't send it in for whatever reason, or let's say the couple went on a honeymoon and they forgot to bring in the form or whatever it is, then they can go in and get civilly married, which doesn't necessarily have to be anything. They can go sign the papers themselves. In other words, so what I'm trying to say is in Jewish law's perspective, civil marriage has nothing to do with Judaism.
Right, no, I
So
get that,
yes,
but I was just wondering
in
if
state
the
law
rabbi will
or
also do the civil
yes,
part
so
of marriage.
yes, so state law might be that a rabbi needs to do the civil marriage. So then he will do it. State law might be it's up to you. It's up to you. And therefore you might say, you know what, we're too busy right now. We'll go into the office ourselves.
What's the law here in Arizona?
Arizona is, I believe, you have to do the civil law, civil marriage. Again, if the couple refuses to do the civil marriage with the rabbi for whatever reason, I don't know if he has to do it, but yeah, he's supposed to register his marriage with the government. There are different states, honest truth, different states that have different opinions about this. But yes, if you go to a rabbi and he, for whatever reason, does not do it, he wasn't aware. Let's say there's a visiting rabbi from Israel and you say, oh, I want this rabbi to marry me. He's a wonderful rabbi and he has no idea about the civil law or anything like that. You are 100% married. In other words, even if he's a criminal and he says, I'm not going to file it, and it's the law that you have to file it, you are 100% married according to Jewish law.
But did the Rambam accept sort of what we commonly refer to as common law marriage?
No.
That's a good question.
Like civil marriage?
No?
Like meeting someone and saying, let's be married?
No,
I thought there was something.
what he's saying is that in the Gentile laws, if you live together, there's some states that recognize if you live together as husband and wife for a certain period of time, then you're considered married civilly.
No, so the Rambam doesn't really accept that. That's not, I mean, there is, basically what happened was in America, a lot of Jews don't get married according to Jewish law. And then they get divorced, right? So now here's the question. If they were only married civilly, are they considered married or not? So Jewish law wants them to not be considered married. But there's some rabbis who say, no, they are considered married.
But it's so easy to get married under Jewish law based on what we just read in the Rambam.
Well,
then that could actually happen.
You might not be aware of it.
Having a service by a rabbi. Right?
You might not be aware of it. You might not believe in it. So in American, in Jewish law, basically, there are times when we want them to be married, and then times when we don't want them to be married, according to Jewish law. Because if they're not religious, right, and they don't get a divorce, so we want everyone to be married according to Jewish law and divorce according to Jewish law. That's a mitzvah. But let's say they won't get a divorce, so then we don't want them to be married, technically, right? At the same time, there are certain advantages that if they are married. So, for example, if it's a Kohen, if they want the kids to be Kohanim. So it's quite complex. There is a whole debate about, what marriages halacha accepts. And we'll see, because we'll see the different types of marriages, and it could be one of them might fall into. So you need witnesses that you're saying to your wife, I'm going to have relations with you. We'll say later, I'm going to have relations with you for the sake of marriage. You always need witnesses. Now, the witnesses of Jewish law are very, very unique. These are not witnesses who are writing down or testifying what they saw. The Torah says you need witnesses. So in other words, the witnesses are actually creating the marriage. The witnesses are actually more important than the rabbi in the marriage. The rabbi is just there to make sure that there's right witnesses. Now, a lot of people don't know. If someone doesn't keep Shabbos, they're not a kosher witness. And so
There are a lot of.
So that's a big problem, right? So then, if someone, or if they're a relative, or this or that, there's many, many things which constitute not being a kosher witness. So a lot of times, so that will cause a problem. If in the olden days, these are the laws of a witness. So, a lot of Chabad rabbis, when they marry someone, they'll say, I have my own hired witnesses that I always hire, because I just don't want to offend anybody. Because it's not just Shabbos; it's a lot of laws of Judaism. If you don't keep them,
well, that makes sense though, because he wants the marriage to be legal.
Correct. So he'll be like, I always bring my guys. They'll be like, oh, we want my friend to be witness. It's like, no, I always bring my guys, and they'll even do it, even if the guy's 100% Orthodox and keeps Shabbos and kashrus and everything like that. They'll be like, we're sorry, I use my own witnesses. He just doesn't want to offend anybody.
Well, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. If he wants to do the right thing.
So it's a difficult thing because, so many times people get witnesses who are unfamiliar with certain laws of Judaism, and there's many laws of Judaism that make someone a kosher witness, and people are unfamiliar with that, and they'll be like, oh, my best friend will be my witness, and now, what does that help? Sometimes it's really funny. I mean, sometimes people will be like, oh, this guy, let's say the wife cheated on her husband and had kid, got pregnant, or whatever it is. They'll be like, oh, well, let's look who the witnesses were, if they were kosher witnesses. Because if they weren't kosher witnesses, maybe we can save those kids. We can save those kids.
Our son, when we lived in Baltimore, and our son was in high school, we were, and he was Shomer Shabbos. So in our shul, Rabbi Wolberg always took Joel, our son, as a witness, because he knew we lived in the neighborhood of the shul and we were Shomer Shabbos.
Also, it's helpful if you now at the same time, like when you're a witness, even I've been a witness several times. The rabbis always tell you, okay, repent to God on any sins or anything, because if you are not a kosher witness, then you're potentially causing the marriage not to fall halachically, and that's obviously problematic. So, witness is quite a responsibility, and obviously, women can't be a witness for this. Relatives can't be witnesses.
Gamblers.
There's a whole long list of different things that can. Now, so let's say also, certain times there are people who might, sometimes they'll they'll gamble and nobody knows, and gamblers can't be witnesses, right? And they'll say, or Shomer Shabbos, talking about privacy-wise.
Gambling for a living.
Privacy-wise, right? So they might say, I don't want to be a witness, and it's okay, you don't have to be a witness, but they might say, I don't want to be a witness, because they know, even though the rabbi assumes that I do all these things, maybe I don't, or whatever it is, and I don't want to wreck anybody's marriage.
So all these rabbis who are performing weddings, essentially, the overwhelming majority of them are not valid Jewish weddings.
There's a lot of
these people are Shomer Shabbos.
There's a lot of halacha. Well, so almost.
I don't think they're
And
at all.
they even
I don't think
the
any
text of just a second. The text of the Ketubah is not halachic. It's not. There's a reform text, which is different from the traditional text. So those weddings are all invalid?
Okay, first of all, let's put it another way. Israel does not accept any marriages from America as marriages unless the rabbi has some kind of connection with a certified rabbi in Israel who can say, yes, you can trust that rabbi. So that's pretty much, even Chabad rabbis, if I would just do a marriage and not bring up any connection, because in America there's no law, anyone can call themselves Chabad, anyone can call themselves Orthodox.
Right.
So yes, so if a witness, even an Orthodox wedding, if the rabbi doesn't do his due diligence and the witness is not a kosher witness, one of them is not a kosher witness, then it's not halachic marriage. So there's a lot of halachas in marriage to be aware of that can ruin the, so it's like...
If Nancy and I wanted to make Aliyah and have our marriage accepted in Israel, what would we do? We were married 50 years ago.
So they might do one of two things. Number one, they might ask you to contact the rabbi and work out if indeed, because one thing's for sure, if you're not an Orthodox rabbi, you should at least be transparent if you follow halacha or not, or you follow halacha or not. That's one thing. Now, another thing that people do all the time, people go to Israel and they have a second marriage. They do it all the time. They have like a second marriage, not like they don't rent a huge hall. They just.
Would our children, though,
Is that
be
even allowed?
is,
Yeah, sure. So all the time in Israel people do
You
it.
could get married again?
No, I can't get married again
Why?
because I'm already halachically married. But if someone's first marriage is in doubt, what they might do is they'll say, just do a second marriage, and they won't say like rent a hall and rent a band unless you really want to.
just pro forma?
They'll say, let's get a minyan of men. You need a minyan of men together, and let's go do it. And in Israel, in fact, they'll do it in the municipal building. They'll say, here's a rabbi. You want to get civilly married? Let's get a minyan together tomorrow. We're getting married here. Done. No wedding dress, no nothing. Let's just get it done.
Right.
So that illegitimate children are only, well, we'll talk about illegitimate children that we're concerned about nowadays are mamzerim. Mamzerim,
But if we
Do you
can't,
have connection with Israel?
if we can't prove according to Israeli law, Jewish law, that ours is a halakhic marriage, then our children, I mean, they're all adults, are they considered illegitimate children by Israel?
so illegitimate is only, so again, illegitimate children in Israel is only if the marriage, if they're born out of wedlock, right? That's the only time that there's a halachic difference in illegitimate children. There are,
Wedlock according to Jewish law.
well, so that's correct. So that's another thing. If someone has a kid out of wedlock and it's not, according to, someone has a child out of wedlock.
Does Eretz Yisrael trust the rabbi that was at your wedding?
One second,
party?
give me a second. Yeah. But it's interesting because even if Israel doesn't trust your rabbi, it could be your rabbi did follow halacha and therefore you are married, right? So you can't say, oh, they don't trust it. So illegitimate children in Israel, it's not really, there's no really relevance. If you're not in wedlock, and if you're not married and you have a child and they go to Israel and they want to get married to someone, it's not really relevant if the parents were halachically married or not. But if you are younger, right, and you want to file as married, then that's where it'll make a difference. So when people make aliyah when they're older, they don't really care. They don't really make a difference. They don't really need to recognize it. But if you want to get married in Israel when you're younger, then they do need it. So it's kind of a big deal nowadays.
No kidding.
Israel kind of shook it up a bit. They used to trust any Orthodox marriage, but then what happened was people would say, hey, my rabbi was Orthodox, prove he isn't, whatever it is. So there are, it is interesting because, there's a lot of laws, and it is possible that a good rabbi, Orthodox rabbi, will go and he might say after there was a mistake at the wedding, whatever it is. So you have to do a lot of due diligence nowadays to make sure that they're fully married and they're fully.
Surely our rabbis passed away.
I forgot. I'm going to work on it soon. Okay.
This is a can of worms.
It is a can of worms. Now, again, there's an advantage is sometimes people don't get married by a legitimate rabbi, and then they get divorced civilly, and then they have children, and that would be a problem. That would be mamzerim. That would be real illegitimate children that can't marry anybody. And they go to a big rabbi, and they'll say, hey, who is the rabbi? And they'll say, oh, he was not observant. And they'll say, oh, that's good. You're going to be okay because you weren't really married. You weren't really in wedlock. And so that sometimes helps on the other side. Yeah.
Was your wedding this one?
Ask me after. Okay, let's learn a little bit, Tanya, because
It's a
I
nightmare.
got to finish.
Thank you for asking so many questions.
Well, I'm just totally fascinated by this. I don't know
Yeah.
why. But, since I've been married 3 times, I guess,
Yeah?
it makes me,
You're a pro.
All right, let's go. Let's learn for a few minutes, Tanya, because we're going to learn the laws of getting married. And you'll see a lot of questions come up. Really, like Chabad rabbis, because they live in non-religious areas, they're really the masters of it because they are aware. Like a couple years ago, there was a guy who got married, and it turned out he wasn't even Jewish in the Orthodox community in New York. And I said, well, that rabbi's not used to asking, not used to proving if people, somebody Jewish, look, he's wearing tzitzis in the yarmulke and he's prays 3 times a day. For sure he's Jewish. It's a question. Because in Jewish law, that was accepted. But nowadays, that's not accepted anymore because, if I marry somebody, it doesn't matter who it is, I will make them pay a certain company to determine that they are 100% Jewish. Because I don't want the problem on my hands if it wasn't their fault. They did it in good, and there are many things could make them not Jewish. They did it totally with good intentions, and it wasn't their fault. So, that has become basic for all rabbis, especially Chabad rabbis, to do that. There is quite a can of worms in it, So sometimes someone will come and they'll say here's my ketubah, look, I'm halakhically married, and I will see something which clearly invalidates it. But I won't say, oh, get married halakhically, because I don't know them. are they willing to take on the responsibility? There's a responsibility in getting married halachically. It's not just
It's not just the bride and groom though, it's the witnesses too.
correct.
They can
This is
invalidate a
super
wedding.
important.
Correct.
So I understand.
Witnesses is a huge can of worms. Witnesses is a huge can of worms.
Yeah, I understand why rabbis would bring their own witnesses, because how are you, I mean, the witness has to be Shomer Shabbos, so that can invalidate a marriage.
A witness has to be pretty observant, and there's certain things. I mean, it's quite. It's we'll study the laws of witnesses here. What we're going to say is a witness is someone who doesn't steal, but basically in the olden days there were certain things that you were not considered trustworthy, and we keep those things now, and it's quite interesting. So yeah, if you're doing a marriage, you can be a witness. The rabbi can be a witness because the rabbi's not really doing anything. He's just making sure everything gets done. He's not really marrying them. He's just making sure they get married. So he can be a witness, and he only needs to bring one other person to be a witness with him. So that is now that person cannot be related to him.
Okay. Are there companies that actually can go back and research somebody's background and determine whether they're Jewish or not? And would you accept a DNA test?
I wouldn't. That's too hot of a subject. I don't have the expertise
Okay, 'cause-
of recognizing if someone's Jewish, and
Yeah,
also
but a
typically.
DNA test is a
So,
scientific thing.
so there
right?
is one
'Cause
rabbi
I'm-
who's respectable.
I'm asking for a reason, because I have had a DNA test and it said I'm 99.9% Jewish.
So the simple answer is no. DNA test at this point in history is not worth much in halacha.
Okay.
However, there are certain rabbis now who, as if they are 90% sure you're Jewish, then they'll take the DNA test for the last 10%. They'll 90% Jewish. They'll take the DNA test for the last 10%. What they'll typically do is try and trace back mothers until they find a mother who was someone who went to mikvah and was observant, basically observant Jew. And then if they can trace back those mothers biologically, and DNA test can help with biologically tracing back to that person, but can't necessarily, DNA can't say if you're Jewish or not. It can just trace you back to a person. Now, if they were an observant Jew, so they have the ability to say they're Jewish and be believed. Nowadays, because because the world is different, and you just never know nowadays. You can't just say you're Jewish and be accepted. For a minyan on Shabbos is rabbinic origin. So you can say you're Jewish and be believed. And if it's not true and it's a mistake, it's not a grave sin. So we made a mistake. But for marriages and things like that, which are tied to a bunch of biblical laws, we have to be extra careful.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for continuing.
So I'll be honest, if there's a kid who comes to Hebrew school, if there's a kid who wants his bar mitzvah done, I will make him do these tests. I will make him do that if he wants to be bar mitzvah, because I don't want to establish that he's Jewish and fool him. I want him to know, what he needs to do, as well as, or I will say, by the way, you're coming to Hebrew school, but we won't be able to make your bar mitzvah until you do that, because you can come to Hebrew school, but I just don't want to establish for your own good. I don't want to establish anything. So it is a worthy thing to do. I mean, if I would get, it was interesting when I got married, they did not check. They did not check in the religious community. Now they do. And I was curious then. They don't check. They don't ask any questions.
Have you performed a marriage yet?
I've never performed a marriage. I've said no to performing marriages. Now, you can use you can use your imagination, a lot of different reasons to say no. But it's really important to do the birur. It's called birur, because you need to find out if you're going to establish a Jewish family here, and you don't want it to come back and trace back that you gave them an impression that wasn't true.
It affects both the people who are married, but it affects you too.
Yes, correct.
Because if it turns out to be invalid, then
it's a huge mess. It's going to be a huge mess.
Right.
So let's say I happen to know, my maternal line for many years, and my wife happens to know her maternal line for many years. So it wouldn't really be an issue. But I know even in Brooklyn, in Crown Heights, there were many people who became Orthodox and joined and found out in Israel all the time. And the Rebbe would actually cry and scream about Israel. If they're not going to be diligent, then they're going to create a huge mess. And they did create a huge mess in Israel. The people who find out that they weren't Jewish all the time, and it's really a mess. And so yeah, these are hot topics nowadays. I don't usually do the beer. I send it to a expert that has like a court, and what they'll do is they'll say, fill out this form, go back all the family members. Can you dig up a ketubah of your ancestors? If you can dig that up and see an Orthodox rabbi. I have written letters for Israel's citizenship. Now that isn't as strict. Now, if it's a young person, then you better confirm it, because they're going to get married, they're going to do life cycle events in Israel, and it's going to come bite back. If it's someone who's elderly and they're moving to Israel, it doesn't matter so much, because now Israel, ironically, they will accept non-halachic Jewish documents for citizenship, but not for life cycle events. So if it's an older person, and they're going to be accepted anyways because they have a document. Now, because I am nervous about it, and you never know, maybe in Israel it will change, and now a citizen will follow halacha. All it takes is an election. So I do due diligence pretty well, and I don't make them do a full birur. Like, I wouldn't marry them, but like, let's say one guy didn't have anything, and I did research, and I found that he had a signature, his mother had a signature by a well-known Orthodox rabbi in Detroit for a civil marriage document. License had a signature, and I dug my own stocking online, and I spoke to him, and he said, if that rabbi married them, then you can assure that they were both Jewish, because he was a very, very so these are very hot topics. I mean, at the Chabad conventions, there's always, I usually go to the discussions about it because it's quite fascinating. There are people who work in this full time. Chabad rabbis don't work in it full time, and the reason is because Chabad rabbis are prone to being bribed, potentially. It's not really bribed, but it's like it's someone in your community, someone you care about. It's not like they're going to bribe you. It's just you're going to want to he's Jewish, So you want to bring in a third party in order to confirm that,
But we live in perilous times because the frum community moves to the right.
Correct.
But the non-Orthodox community moves to the left. So they're diverging.
Right.